Numerous factors contributed to making the early 1900s a pivotal moment for a voracious collector and a canny librarian. The 1897 Tariff Act had raised the duties on art, but imported books and manuscripts could enter the U.S. duty-free. After Pierpont Morgan came into his inheritance in 1890, his collecting activities accelerated exponentially. By 1902, Morgan had amassed more than 10,000 books, having purchased en bloc the collections of English book dealer James Tuvey, American financier Theodore Irwin, and English collector Richard Bennett. By 1906, the construction of Morgan's library, a Renaissance-inspired building designed by Charles McKim, was completed. An article in the New York Times hailed this bookman's paradise. And so that's some images of the library. And I'll read one of the, a passage from the New York Times article. One passes, I think that it might actually, yeah, here we go. One passes through the gates into a lofty hall of rarest marble. I'm only going to read the highlighted parts in blue. And then into an apartment as lofty, the walls of which glow from floor to ceiling with the unique splendor that only volumes in fine bindings provide. Fun fact, gilded book covers on Moroccan leather were considered a highly prized decorating feature of the Gilded Age. And at the beginning of Edith Wharton's House of Mirth, when Lily Bart walks into Lawrence Selden's room, she admires the gilded bindings on the Moroccan leather. This was the world into which Belle da Costa Greene stepped in 1905 when Morgan hired her as his personal librarian. So here we have images of Morgan and Belle Greene. By the time Greene retired in 1948, her accomplishments had become legendary. Okay, so the catalog, which accompanies a 1948 exhibition held in her honor, lists her editions: 17,000 general works, 31 Rembrandt drawings, 596 incunabula, and 138 manuscripts, an astounding achievement by any measure. We are at the point where the remarkable life of Belle da Costa Greene finds its moment. Born in 1879, Belle was the daughter of two mixed-race blacks, Genevieve Fleet and Richard T. Greener. It's very difficult to make out her mother, which I've used a red box there, but that's the only known photo of her mother. Her father was the first black man to graduate from Harvard, and he pursued a variety of careers: librarian, public service, dean of Howard College, Howard University, and diplomat. When they separated in 1887, Genevieve Fleet assumed a Dutch middle name, Van Vliet, changed the family's last name to Greene, and lived as White. Belle Marion Greener became Belle da Costa Greene, the da Costa a subtle claim to Portuguese ancestry. Belle Greene's subsequent life of self-invention is a consequence of her mother's self-transformation. There's a lot to say about racial passing, of course, but today I want to talk about professionalism, not identity. Or, put another way, the professional identity so meticulously pursued by Belle Greene. Greene's passing can be seen as part of a larger exercise in self-invention and self-transformation. This initial transformation presages a series of changes in which Greene became an expert in manuscripts and early printed books, then Morgan's representative at auctions, the curator and connoisseur of illuminated manuscripts, and finally, the first director of the Morgan Library. As Morgan's librarian, she moved freely among collectors such as Bernard Altman, Charles Freer, Henry Clay Frick, Henry Huntington, Henry Waters, museum curators, rare book and art dealers, as well as publishers, actresses, opera singers, writers, and artists. Glamorous and vivacious, Greene attracted admirers, artists, and journalists. So here's two artistic renditions of her. By her death in 1950, Morgan's librarian had become a celebrated figure in the art and book worlds. A life like Belle Greene's, which blends the splendor of America's Gilded Age and the dangers of passing, has attracted the interest of writers. And these are two recent books on the left and the middle, and the one biography. And some of you are probably familiar with at least one of those titles, probably The Personal Librarian. Alexander Lapierre's 2022 Belle Greene and Marie Benedict's and Victoria Christopher Murray's 2021 The Personal Librarian, both fictionalized biographies, focus on passing. Both works draw on Heidi Ardizzone's 2007 biography, An Illuminated Life, Belle da Costa Greene's Journey from Prejudice to Privilege. It is worth remembering, however, that in the many personal and business letters we have from her, Greene never disclosed her racial ancestry. We might imagine this story, but it was never told, as is often the case in passing. Belle Greene was not simply a librarian, unlike any other, but unlike anyone. She was a librarian, book agent, curator, and became the director of the Morgan Library at a time when men occupied these positions. She was mixed race in a white world. She supported her mother and siblings. She earned $10,000 a year. The Morgan calculates that as $280,000 in today's terms, when other female librarians were earning $400 a year. Her position as the librarian of one of the world's richest men was singular, and the way she inhabited it no less unique. Belle Greene was a category unto herself. Her life, exceptional on its own terms, does not need the sensationalizing through fictional biography. Greene wrote about the rarefied worlds in which she moved in her letters to Bernard Berenson, the renowned art historian. We have a vivid account of the librarian's personal and working life. The connoisseur was the love of her life. And Greene, observes one of Berenson's biographers, was the one romance in Berenson's life that would stand apart from all others in depth and intensity. The two likely met at Morgan's Library in New York in January 1909 and became enamored of one another quickly. The relationship generated 40 years of correspondence and more than roughly just under 600 letters. As Greene destroyed her personal papers before her death, including the hundreds she received from Berenson, only her letters survive. But this was not uncommon, the destruction of one's personal papers at that time. Morgan himself destroyed many of his personal papers. Dickens did the same. Byron's friends destroyed many of his personal papers. Eliot destroyed the letters from Emily Hale, and much more recently, Jackie Kennedy destroyed many of her personal papers. So it wasn't an uncommon practice at the beginning of the 20th century and earlier. While Greene's letters have proven invaluable to writers seeking to reconstruct the larger narrative of her life, the artistry of the letters and the way in which her writing creates a singular self have gone largely unnoticed. And this is the subject that my own book is about. Greene's wide-ranging observations about herself and her responses to her many worlds constitute a form of life writing, one which evokes both her external life and her thoughts on this life. Her reflections, relayed over 4 decades amidst cataclysmic world events, offer a compelling account of her position as Morgan's librarian, her affinities and antipathies, and her cultural moment. I shall return now to one strand of these letters, and that is what they reveal about Greene's working life. More specifically, how she expanded her areas of expertise, employed her networks, the unusual range of her tasks, her views of Pierpont and Jack Morgan, her undertakings after Morgan's death, and her acquisition strategies. Other accounts of Greene's library work have illuminated the achievements listed in her 5-year reports. And she wrote these reports after she became director in 1924. So they generally cover acquisitions, collaboration with other institutions, public outreach. Her letters to Berenson, in contrast, furnish an insider's view of her activities. Their subjectivity allows us to examine how Greene navigated the rare book world and excelled in this male-dominated realm. I will summarize first what we know about her education before she began working for Morgan. From 1896 to 99, she attended an all-girls boarding school, the Northfield Seminary for Young Ladies in Massachusetts. She learned the basics of cataloging during a summer course on librarianship at Amherst College. And let me just show that. This is the earliest known photo of Belle Greene. Taught by William Fletcher, a former president of the American Library Association, the course included lectures on cataloging and the Dewey Decimal System. From 1902, she worked at Princeton's library, where Junius Morgan, Pierpont's nephew, was also employed. Junius Morgan had donated his collection of rare manuscripts and early printed editions of Virgil to his alma mater. When Morgan sought a librarian in 1905, his nephew recommended Belle Greene. Henceforth, Greene's life kicked not just into a higher gear, but became supercharged as she became a lively fixture at social gatherings among America's wealthiest families. Greene's new job required a broader range of skills and expertise than the basics of cataloging she had learned from the Amherst summer course. She pursued her education as her work required. In an April 1909 letter to Berenson, she informs him of her summer plans. Now I'm quoting from her letter. "I have started to study Italian, and I'm also about to take a course in bookbinding, which will doubtless seem absurd to you, but it is very necessary that I understand thoroughly all about the making of my books, as well as the interiors. Then, too, I'm about to take an inventory of the books in the library, which is no small labor." A few lines later, she mentions the British art collector and dealer, Joseph Fitzhenry. "Fitz," she writes, Berenson, "was so extraordinarily kind to me when I was in London and did things for me, for which I could never repay him if I had all the gifts of Valhalla at my behest. His letters are a liberal education to me." Joseph Fitzhenry was but one of many experts who shared his knowledge with the young librarian. The next slide, okay, so that's Junius Morgan, and I'm not going to read all these names. I think it's easier if I just leave them there and you can look over them yourselves. So this slide shows a very partial list of her transatlantic network, which included museum directors, curators, bookmen, and scholars. Yeah, the bookmen are in the second column: Alfred Pollard, Lawrence Roth, Seymour de Ricci, and Quaritch, one of the very famous British book dealers. Her professional papers, which have recently been published on the Morgan Library's Corsair site, list 52 art, manuscript, and rare book dealers. At times, Greene worked alongside her professional friends on specific projects. She compared 3 Gutenberg Bibles with Paul Schwenke, director of Berlin's Royal Library, studied Spanish manuscripts with NYU art historian Walter W.S. Cook, and examined Islamic manuscripts with German art historian Rudolf Meyer-Riefstahl. Collaborative undertakings, lifelong learning, and the refinement of her eye are all hallmarks of Belle Greene's working life. Amidst the many experts whom Greene consulted, 2 stand out: Bernard Berenson and Sidney Cockerell. Both helped the librarian refine her widely praised eye for quality. Berenson assisted her work in a number of ways, helping with attributions, teaching her how to spot forgeries, informing her of fine manuscripts for sale, sending her books on specialized topics, furnishing his opinions on people, writing articles about objects in Wright Morgan's collection, and providing information on artifacts whose purchase she or Morgan were contemplating. As one of the foremost authorities on Italian medieval and Renaissance art, Berenson's expertise was invaluable. Most importantly, Greene would have observed Berenson's formidable capacity for looking as the 2 studied many works in Italian museums and churches during the summer of 1910. Sidney Cockerell, director of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, was another important mentor. After meeting Greene in 1908, Cockerell recorded the occasion in his diary. "My first meeting with Belle da Costa Greene, a very nice, intelligent woman with a great enthusiasm for manuscripts. This praise should not be underestimated. Cockerell regularly tested visitors and dismissed those whose way of looking at books fell short of his expectations." As Greene informed Berenson, Cockerell was, quoting, "one of her truest friends, one who taught her the all too little she knows." Before he became director of the Fitzwilliam, Cockerell was the secretary of William Morris's Kelmscott Press and had assimilated the artist's criteria for evaluating manuscripts: attention to the price, condition, grandeur and beauty of a manuscript, quality of its script, and the number of illustrations. Cockerell frequently gave informal tutorials to visitors. Belle Greene would have been the recipient of highly curated tutorials. So, how to become a visionary librarian like Belle Greene? Learn and profit from the best. Among the tasks which awaited Greene upon her appointment was the creation of an inventory and the cataloging of Morgan's roughly 10,000 books. Greene brought bibliographic order to an immense collection and created the basic cataloging system for manuscripts still in practice at the Morgan Library and Museum today. She employed an accession system with the prefix MS for manuscript, followed by M, which designates manuscripts purchased by Pierpont and Jack Morgan. This system is well suited for libraries with closed stacks, given that the Morgan Library houses many of its rare volumes in a vault. There's the one on the left is the vault before it was restored, and the color one is after the restoration. So this system works very well for libraries with closed stacks. Greene also deserves credit for initiating the library's detailed catalog records. Today's Morgan Library benefits from its heritage of unusually thorough library records, first compiled by Belle Greene and her assistant, Ada Thurston. Greene's work for Morgan also included some unusual duties. One of the little-known aspects of the bookman's paradise was its popularity as a gathering place. The banker's friends, his mistresses, dealers, publishers, curators, and writers came by regularly. On a single day in November 1910, actor Walter Hampton beseeched Greene to get him into the New Theater. The New Theater was a venture in which Morgan had a stake. Playwright Louis Anspacher asked her to browbeat the theater's manager into taking one of his new plays. The artist Carlos Bacaflor showed her a gown he wanted her to wear for a painting, and another playwright, Gustav Cobb, read his drama, which Greene dismissed as punk in capital letters in the letter. This was one of her favorite put-downs. She also assumed the role of a personal assistant at times, not always willingly. I'm now quoting another section, another letter. JPM just keeps me on the move all the time, and precious little library work do I get accomplished. Instead, I busy myself with housekeeping, entertaining, politics, art, and dogs. At times, I find it a hateful existence, at others, extremely interesting. Scheduling Morgan's housekeeping, the comings and goings of friends and business associates, entertaining politicians would have been a full-time job for most people, and an exhausting one at that. Greene discharged these tasks as well as her library work. This hectic work ended with Morgan's death. March 1913. Pierpont Morgan left no indications for the future of his library in his will, aside from expressing a wish that Greene be retained at her present salary. To understand Bill Greene's subsequent actions, her immense efforts to help Jack Morgan, we must consider her sentiments towards the Big Chief, her nickname for her boss. Working for Morgan had been exhausting, trying, and thrilling. The financier's demands drained her vitality, and though she complained of being enchained, her devotion to, I'm quoting her, my very beloved boss was profound. A June 1909 letter to Berenson relays the complexity of her sentiments, as well as her gift for dramatization, self-projection, and self-aggrandizement. So I'll just read the section in blue. Please don't jeer at my dearly beloved boss. You can't know how your perhaps thoughtless words hurt me. They cut like a whip and make me physically, mentally, and at heart sick. You see, I have a peculiarly tender feeling for him for many reasons, but most of all, perhaps, because he has shown himself to me in the all too few years I have known him. Few of Greene's letters convey the depth of feeling found in this description of her relationship with Morgan. She casts the banker as a lonely man of sorrows, angelic yet human, and herself as his chosen confidant. Greene's protectiveness of Morgan explains the declaration she makes after his death in another letter. Quote, to have been so sure of his love and trust that I have never questioned it gives me an inspiration for all the rest of my life. I shall be working for him every hour of every day to come. Belle Greene did not just make this formidable vow, she fulfilled it. The tasks she subsequently undertook attest resoundingly to her loyalty and industry. At Jack Morgan's bequest, Greene began by preparing an inventory of 21,000 books in April 1913, an undertaking she described as a long, wearisome, grinding task. She subsequently became involved in another demanding undertaking. I turn now to actions undertaken by Greene that have been largely overlooked. Her role in ensuring the future of Morgan's library and how she did this. This work begins with the assessment of some 41,000 objects, Morgan's collections of Chinese porcelains, a series of Progress of Love, Fragonard paintings, French enamels, 18th century furniture, tapestries, bronzes, and many other artifacts. Greene also monitored the two advisors, Charles Hercules Reed and Charles Fairfax Murray, and monitored as well the maneuvers of dealers, chief among them. Many dealers were all vying to acquire these objects so they could then resell them. She also was monitoring the maneuvers of dealers, chief among them the Duveen brothers. Reed was a friend and ally. The connoisseur and dealer, Murray, on the other hand, was a mercurial scoundrel with a brilliant eye. Christopher DeHamel, in a recent book, he's a well-known expert on illuminated manuscripts, describes Fairfax Murray as half genius, half prince of darkness. Jack Morgan had paid Murray $50,000 to do the appraisals, but by the end of 1914, this work remained undone. So we have Jack Morgan, Charles Hercules Reeve, and Murray, who was a late Pre-Raphaelite artist, a self-portrait. Greene, who detested Murray, succeeded in discrediting him. After this, she had little choice but to take on the appraisal work herself. Greene's role in this pivotal moment of the history of the library has been all but erased. Other accounts of this period simply note that Jack Morgan sold many of his father's artifacts to pay inheritance taxes. Greene's 108 letters to Berenson in 1914, and that is a lot more letters than she typically wrote to him, especially at the beginning years of their relationship, say 1909 to about 1912 or so. She wrote about 40, 45 letters a year. To write 108 in that 1 year is really far more than she typically wrote. She just simply didn't have the time. So a number of these letters reveal the extent to which she was involved in the valuation and the dispersal of the collections. From a February 1915 letter shows Greene's account of the results of her actions. So I'll read the highlighted parts in blue. Women are so constituted that they can only think of one thing at a time, and all I can think of now is selling the collection advantageously. It's easy enough to sell it, but I want and insist upon 50 to 100% profit on the cost price. He here refers to Jack Morgan, despises them being the Duveens. He despises them to an extraordinary degree and leaves all the business to me for that reason. Complimentary to me, isn't it? But as I wrote you, I enjoy it all immensely, except that the Duveens are now beginning to suspect that I'm not as foolish as I look and pretend. And then a few lines later, I feel that my mission here is pretty nearly finished, as I have definitely succeeded in tying Jack Morgan up to the library. He is perfectly mad about it. So here, every morning, if only for an hour, he tells me all about all his affairs, even financial, and in fact is beginning to look very much as his father did. In this wide-ranging account, we see how the librarian has noted the single-minded nature of women, described Jack Morgan's contemptuous treatment of the Duveens, acknowledged her own sang-froid, and gloried over her victories. Having ousted Murray, obtained the prices she sought, outplayed the Duveens, and inspired Jack Morgan's enthusiastic embrace of the library, she can declare, my mission here is pretty nearly finished. Let's put this declaration in context. In 1909, Belle Greene was taking lessons in Italian and bookbinding. 6 years later, she's reporting her power moves. Greene helped net $3 million for the Chinese porcelains, $1,250,000 for Fragonard's Progress of Love, and here it is in its temporary location, but I think the Frick is reopened. Then $3 million for the furniture and $4 million for the Lamage enamels in Maiolica. She took pains to control the public narrative on the sales as well. After Met director at the time, Edward Robinson, voiced regret over the loss of objects which Morgan had loaned to the museum, Greene wrote an anonymous letter for the New York Times, Morgan Gifts to Metropolitan, which outlined gifts amounting to more than $10 million that the two Morgans had donated. All this work transformed Belle Greene, her relation to Jack Morgan, and her new boss's views of the library. The self she projects is triumphant, the tone assured. In the midst of these activities, Greene reflected on how her job had changed her. I think I would have been a much nicer person if I had not taken or gotten my present job. I would have been married, perhaps to a Princeton man, but I would at least have been a more natural female and with some ideals left. Query, was it the kindness or the revenge of the gods? This is from an undated letter from March 1914. A much nicer person she may have been, but her extraordinary achievements in subsequent years tipped the scales in favor of the severe kindness of the gods. We might also view these observations in the light of other statements Greene made in an interview with the New York Evening Post from October 1916. If women sought to enter the workplace, they should be prepared to show undivided loyalty, industry, and preparedness. Greene embodied the qualities she considered essential for working women, and she was on her way to fulfilling the larger vision she imagined for Morgan's future. So let's step away from the library for a moment and consider a photo of Belle Greene taken in 1915. This was roughly about the end of the time when she was engaged in all of the transactions to evaluate the collections. This photograph stands out from others of the Librarian in notable ways. And here are some of the other photos of her by Baron de Meyer, Theodore Morceau, and Clarence Wright. All these photographers were well known in their time. The last one, my favorite photo of Greene, was taken by Paul Thompson. We see Greene in her home as she styled herself and her environment, sitting on the arm of an elaborate chair, upholstered in a tapestry weave. She wears an elaborate hat with a large ostrich plume, a high-necked blouse under a long, loosely belted jacket with a ruffled cuff over a long, dark skirt. Note the decor. Flemish tapestries decorate the walls behind her. A liturgical vestment is draped over the bookcase. The photo showcases how Belle Greene identifies herself as a stylish woman amidst beautiful medieval and Renaissance objects. Belle Greene transformed herself as she begins to envision the transformation of Morgan's personal library into a public institution. All right, so let's now go back to Greene's working life. Another spectacular action followed the selling of Morgan's collection. With the library's future secured, Greene could begin thinking about collection development and expansion. In 1915, she informed one of Bernard Quaritch's employees, is the famous British firm of book dealers, that she would be buying again at the end of the war. We turn now to one of Greene's most important acquisitions, the 13th century Crusader Bible, also known as the Shaw Abbas Bible. So here are a couple of images. I think I've got one more slide. Prized for its vivid battle scenes and a fascinating provenance that includes Louis IX, the Bishop of Krakow, and Shaw Abbas, King of the Persians, the Crusader Bible is considered a masterpiece of French Gothic illumination. You might notice too, along the sides and up at the top, inscriptions in Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic. Christopher de Hamel, was one of the world's authorities on illuminated manuscript, considers the Crusader Bible, the greatest acquisition of Belle Greene's career. Both Berenson and Cockerill were involved in this acquisition. Cockerill, who had seen this manuscript in 1904 and 1908, considered it incomparable. Roughly 8 months after Greene met Cockerill in December 1908, she prevailed upon Berenson to ask Paul Durieux, a French expert on manuscript illumination, for his opinion of manuscripts in the possession of some man in Cheltenham. So I'm not going to read this, but I've outlined that section of the letter. This letter offers a glimpse of the stealth with which Greene could pursue a treasured object. She likely had some knowledge of the rare codices owned by this man at Cheltenham. During her December 1908 meeting with Cockerill, he may have alluded to Thomas Phillips, a self-declared velomaniac, and his astounding collection of 60,000 manuscripts written on vellum. The man at Cheltenham is Thomas Fitzroy Fenwick, Phillips's grandson. In November 1916, Cockerill showed Greene a leaf from the Crusader Bible, which he had purchased for his personal collection. A few days later, the English collector Henry Yates Thompson accompanied Greene to Fenwick's estate. Upon displaying the manuscript to his guests, Fenwick declared it would cost $10,000. And in one version of what happened next, Greene swiftly replied, "I'll take it, you will receive a check," and walked out with the manuscript in her handbag. 2 days later, she informed Cockerill of the purchase and sought his advice. He coolly replied, "The manuscript you were clever enough to secure in Cheltenham is an incomparable treasure. I have long regarded it as the most covetable manuscript of the 13th century in private hands." There's more than a dash of drama to this account. In fact, the manuscript was not released until Fenwick informed Greene that the Court of Chancery had approved the sale, and she did not leave the estate with the manuscript in her handbag. But perhaps such a treasure cannot help but accrue fantastic elements along its travels. More important than the fictional elements in this story, however, is what it reveals about Greene's strategies when she was on the hunt: an adept use of back channels, secrecy, the exploitation of her network, a willingness to play the long game, and the seizure of opportunities when they presented themselves. The acquisition of the Crusader Bible became the basis of Jack Morgan's contributions to the Morgan Library. Time doesn't allow for the discussion of more stunning manuscripts, so I will show you instead a few slides of rare books and manuscripts that Greene helped acquire. So this is one of the most famous ones. She purchased for $42,500 Caxton's printing of Le Morte d'Arthur, and this turned her into a celebrity librarian. You can sort of see one example of that in this $50,000 for that book. Numerous newspapers wrote articles about her at that point. And then a couple of other manuscripts, this gospel book commissioned by Matilda of Tuscany, this one, printed work of Aristotle's Operae, works illustrated by Girolamo da Cremona, and the Life and Miracles of St. Edmund. I think maybe there's only one more. Yeah, okay, Mathilde Soisson's Psalter Hours. I will end this consideration of Greene's working life with some observations about her activities after Pierpont Morgan's death. A few weeks after his passing, she wrote Berenson, "As to the library, it can never be the same wonderful, joyous place again. You know, or rather you do not know, that it had an atmosphere of sheer exuberant, intoxicating joy that everyone who came within its walls felt. If I can make a big institution out of it, it will be all that I or anyone else can expect. I shall start in just as soon as this inventory business is over, to see what I can do to make it a dernier resort for scholars in certain fields. to make our material available to them and to make them welcome. Greene had the opportunity to realize her vision of transforming a private library into a big institution. As the director from 1924 to 48, she organized the transfer of thousands of books and manuscripts into the annex in 1928. This is a new construction which included a reading room and space for exhibitions. The library continued to be a wonderful, joyous place, but now one which resembled more a scholar's paradise than one bookman's Arcadia. Her 5-year reports and the catalog to the 1948 exhibition in her honor document amply her achievements. From the 1920s to her retirement in 1948, Greene invited numerous specialists to give lectures on specialized topics in the annex. And here's a picture of the annex and some of the titles of the talks that she helped organize. Greene also affected outreach in other impressive ways. Exhibitions were mounted in collaboration with a number of institutions, among them Columbia University, the New York Public Library, the Walters Gallery, New York Institute of Fine Arts, Harvard's Fogg Art Museum, and the Met. She moved quickly. 11 months after she was appointed director, Greene helped prepare a blockbuster exhibition entitled Original Manuscripts and Drawings of English Authors, opened at the New York Public Library in 1924 with manuscripts loaned from the Morgan Library. The displays included more than 300 items, manuscripts from Wordsworth, Milton, Scott, Dickens, Pope, and Charlotte Bronte among them. The exhibition attracted 180,000 people and showcased Greene's commitment to provide, in her words, caviar for the people, to educate the public through sumptuous displays of rare artifacts. Over the course of her tenure as director, the Morgan Library mounted 46 exhibitions. The masterpieces of art for the 1939 New York World's Fair attracted 20,000 visitors. The exhibition included 350 works, including illuminated manuscripts, drawings by Raphael, Andrea del Sarto, Watteau, Rembrandt, Dürer, and Gainsborough, seals from Egypt and the Near East, and Renaissance tapestry. The exhibition, wrote one reviewer, evidences the heights to which man has attained intellectually and culturally. Time doesn't allow me to mention tributes to Belle Greene during her lifetime. I will mention just one. The posthumous publication, I think I've got a slide of that, yeah. The posthumous publication, Studies in Art and Literature for Belle da Costa Greene. Okay, this is 500 pages, 400 photos, 51 articles on iconography, painting, architecture, sculpture, the decorative arts, the illumination and paleography of medieval manuscripts, bookbinding, literary and bibliographical studies. These are all the areas of her interest. It's a massive book, and just lifting it is a challenge to the spine. This account brings us to the present. The exhibition planned by the Morgan Library and Museum to celebrate its first centenary, Belle da Costa Greene, a Morgan's librarian's legacy, will offer visitors an opportunity to acquaint themselves with her extraordinary achievements later this year. I think it opens October 25th. In 1909, Greene imagined herself on the brink of entering a glowing world. I felt that I should like to enter into all the life that glows and teems upon the earth, to feel with it. By the end of her career, Belle Greene proved that this was not a dream, but a life that she had fashioned and inhabited spectacularly. Greene's own words describe best her sentiments about the magnificent library to which she devoted herself so unstintingly. I am so glad that I can spend most of my day here in this truly adorable building. The quiet, static, unsullied beauty of it rests and fills me, sometimes to the aching point, because I feel it and love it so intensely. Thank you.